All right, let's go ahead and get started. I don't know where Marcia went. Marcia was right behind me. All right, she's here somewhere. All right, let's go ahead and start. Call the meeting in order. Let's go ahead and have a roll call, please.
Yes. Mayor Bagley?
Here.
Council members Christensen? Here. Finley? Here. Martin?
She is here. Count her in.
Peck? Rodriguez? Here. Waters? Here. Mayor Bagley, we have a quorum.
All right, great. Let's say the pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right, like always, if you want to say something during the first public invited to be heard, make sure you get your name on this list. If not, you can still say something, but you're going to have to go at the end. All right, with that, do I have a motion for the approval of minutes on July 10th, 2018? Do we hear a second? Second. All right, let's vote. Go ahead. Hit plus. Hit your plus. You're good. It's a good vote. All right, that passes unanimously. All right, do we have any agenda revisions or submission of documents or the like? Valerie?
Mayor Bagley, we are pulling the presentation from Visit Longmont from the agenda. They'll come back and do that at another time.
All right. Sounds like a plan. City Manager, do you have a report?
No report, Mayor, Council.
All right, great. Let's go ahead and move on to first call, public invited to be heard. When you come up, if you could please say your name and address, and then everybody's limited to 3 minutes. I hate to cut you off, but you hit that 3, gonna have to just move on. All right, let's go ahead and start with Ms. Paula Fitzgerald.
There we go. Mayor Bagley and Council, Paula Fitzgerald, 419 Emery Street. I'm here tonight representing the historic East Side neighborhood. Forging a balance between divergent interests is what makes your job as City Council difficult. At the last meeting on the Land Development Code, a City Councilor made a comment on how doing things right is better than getting it done quickly. That's wisdom. The code update has not been done hastily, but with thorough consideration. Longmont has a long and strong tradition of embracing authentic public process. Thank you for you and your hardworking staff for taking the time to engage with the public. Brian, Aaron, and Joni in particular should be commended for their hard work. They've answered questions and helped the community engage. Several of you met with us individually and even walked the boundary area to better understand the potential conflicts between commercial and residential. This took time and spoke volumes to your interest and dedication to our community. The new Land Development Code embodies our public vision for Longmont. It will allow our community to build out and infill with high-quality development that will keep our city vital. Equally important, it protects those of us who call Longmont home. It's a win-win outcome, and our historic East Side neighborhood thanks you for your patient and thoughtful process. A newly revised residential compatibility section is beautifully crafted to protect our historic adjacent neighborhood while allowing for a vibrant and improving downtown. Thank you for your commitment and for listening.
Thank you. All right, Edo Clark.
Hi, my name is Dr. Dido Clark of 534 Baker Street. I'm co-chair of the Historic East Side. I would like to congratulate the City Council on their forward thinking. We now have the fastest internet in the West, I believe in the nation. And we combine small town sense of connectedness with big vision thinking. It's a wonderful place to live. I have a request, though, in line with communication. I was wondering if we could step it up. As co-chair, I find that I'm posted by snail mail blueprints for developments in the area. And I have a hard time sharing that on our Twitter account, our Facebook, on our website. I have to scan it. I often don't get much lead time to actually get it out to people. So my request is, could all neighborhood chairs proactively be part of a system where we could be contacted, given electronic alerts about developments in our neighborhoods, and even ones that are adjacent to our neighborhoods that will impact us. For example, the well development and the parking issues there. I got a notice the day before the planning and zoning hearing on that. And that was this week or last week. Sorry. So that's my request, to up our game around electronic communication. And I want to thank you all for your great work as city councillors. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, Ms. Sarah Levison.
Good afternoon, good evening, Mayor and Council. My name is Sarah Levison, address is 634 Emory. I'm writing on smaller and smaller pieces of paper these days. I'm here to address both untaxed food and your item 11B. 11B has national standards for HUD. These would be the same standards of income, whether or not you live in the Delta of Mississippi or New York City or Boulder County, Colorado. I'll draw your attention to the Boulder County Trends Report. I'm holding up the page right now on what is considered a per-year self-sufficiency standard of household income for 2 adults and 1 child in school and 1 preschooler in Boulder County. $75,906. I mentioned this number last week to you as well. If you look down at the page for 11B, you would have to be a family of 10 to qualify for the program with that kind of income. I also want to urge you to do the most good we can for the community and simply move to get the untaxed food initiative on the ballot. Let's have that discussion with the public. I also want to draw your attention to the fact that there are requests out for 11,000 backpacks for crayons to calculators. And even if you look at the numbers between both Boulder County and St. Vrain school districts, we're going to have maybe more than half of those coming to St. Vrain students. Now, that could be 7,000. If you even look at how many families that really is, generously, maybe 3,500 or 4,000 families. If you multiply that by the number of dollar amount for that tax rebate, which is not specifically geared for food tax, we're looking at over $367,000. So the $100,000 you have budgeted will certainly be a drop in the bucket. It will go to people that already do not pay the sales tax on food because they would, at that income level, would be qualified for WIC and food stamps. I also urge you, I know you've seen some numbers in executive session, and it really disables a process of petitioners to engage with the public if we do not have access to the numbers that you do to make decisions. So I would request that you release any numbers that you received from our finance director, Mr. Golden, or anyone else in the finance department to untaxed food. And actually maybe just to the general public so that we can see the same numbers you're looking at. We've not had access to those numbers, nor do I understand that we could even have access if we made a core request. So 2 things, adjust those numbers and come up with a realistic number that's going to help the most people, and put untaxed food on the ballot. Thank you.
Thank you, former Councilmember Levison. Amber Schneider? Yep, I'm reading that right. Amber Schneider. Oh, there she is. Yep, I was like, where is she? I know her.
Okay, my name is Amber Schneider, 1244 Linden Street, here in town. I have two things in 3 minutes that I'd like to cover. The first thing is with Ms. Levinson, the untaxed food. To me, it's a very simple issue council-wise. You guys were voted on and elected by the people. So I think you should have faith in the people to make the decision. That way, they get a chance to vote on it, and the majority rules, just like everybody that got elected to council. I think it's a good discussion to have. It's a worthy thing for a vote, and if it doesn't get voted in, then it goes away like every bad city council member that nobody liked. So I do think it's a worthy thing to have a discussion and let people vote on it. That's it for that one. The other thing is, like I addressed before, I'm having housing issues that are rapidly approaching where I'm not going to be able to stay in my home anymore. I came to the city of Longmont for assistance for this, and I got the affordable housing list. On this list, it is saying that Center for People with Disabilities has Section 8 vouchers. I went to the Center for People with Disabilities. They said that they have not been allowed to have vouchers for the last 5 years, and this has not been addressed. So to me, that's a real small part of the population here in Longmont that needs to have something like that reinstated, to where there can be housing vouchers specifically for handicapped individuals that need help with housing and need different accommodations from other people. The fact that this has been on here and not been addressed for 5 years, to me is troubling, because I'm the one that would be a recipient for this, and they have lost that ability for the last 5 years. So I would urge the council, please, if you have voucher control, reinstate that for the people that need it at that stage. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Schneider. Bill Alley.
Good evening. My name is Bill Alley. I live at 231 East 4th Avenue in Longmont. And I just want to actually congratulate you on item 8B in terms of revising the ordinance for the land development. I remember I was here at the last meeting. I remember one of the comments was that somebody believed in the process and they were kind of for like it was. But I think actually the process is that the planners put together a plan, and they did an excellent job, obviously, in this particular case. And then you hear from the people that are impacted by that plan, and you make modifications, and that's your job to make those difficult decisions. And I just want to thank you for doing that and taking care and taking a look at it, because I think the historic East Side is a real treasure in Longmont, and you want to preserve it. So thank you.
Thank you. All right, that concludes first call public invited to be heard, and that was about as perfect, I think, as a first call public invited to be heard. You had 5 people. It was quick, succinct. You had people challenging us to do better. You had people thanking us. You had people who were once angry, now happy. I'm telling you, that was just I move that we adjourn. Let's just, while we're ahead. All right, let's go ahead and, Valerie, could you go ahead and read the consent agenda for us?
Yes. Item 8A is ordinance 2018-30, a bill for an ordinance authorizing the city of Longmont to lease the real property known as Vance Bram Municipal Airport Hangar Parcel H32 to the Shook Family Trust. Public hearing and second reading is scheduled for August 14th. Item 8B is ordinance 2018-31, a bill for an ordinance updating the Land Development Code by repealing and reenacting Title 15 of the Longmont Municipal Code and associated cross-references, updating the official zoning map, adding Chapter 4.11, adding amending Chapters 13.24, 16.04, and 16.06. Public hearing and second reading is scheduled for August 14th. Item 8C is Resolution 2018-71, approving the intergovernmental agreement between the city and the City of Boulder and Boulder County, establishing the structure and financial governance of the Boulder County Regional Housing Partnership. Item 8D is Resolution 2018-72, approving the intergovernmental agreement between the city and the Colorado Department of Transportation for grant funding for high-visibility impaired driving enforcement. Item 8E is Platte River Power Authority support for economic development. And item 8F is endorse a letter from St. Vrain Valley School District promoting the School Business Partnership Program Community Strong. And staff would like to pull item 8B for a presentation.
All right. Do we have a motion? Councilmember, Mayor Pro Tem Christensen.
I would actually like to pull item B for a couple of questions.
Yeah, okay. Do we have a motion to pass the, do we have a why don't you go ahead and make a motion though, Mayor Pro Tem, and move the consent agenda minus B. Microphone. There we go.
Just babbling. Okay, I would like to move to pass the consent agenda minus item B.
All right, let's vote. And that passes unanimously. All right, let's go ahead and move on to ordinances on second reading. 9A, final public hearing on 2018 CDBG and home action plan. Does staff has a report? I assume no? Yes? I welcome Kathy Fedler.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. Kathy Fedler, Housing and Community Investment Division Manager. So tonight's the public hearing on the final 2018 CDBG action plan. And if you remember, back in March, we went through and did a draft action plan approval, knowing that we were likely to get, things might change once we got our actual award amount. So we did receive about $34,000 more than what we had planned for. And we also are ready to reallocate about $17,000 in prior year's funding that won't be spent as originally planned or allocated. So with those changes, we're bringing this back for final approval. And then also since that time, because of an agreement you'll be seeing on the 14th, I think it's the 14th, to set aside some housing choice vouchers for homeless individuals that have been referred for housing out of the new coordinated entry system. We decided that it would be a good idea if we set aside some of the CDBG funds for rent deposits, utility deposits, that kind of thing, so that once they have their voucher, they can actually get into housing and can sign a lease, et cetera. So what you see before you tonight is the proposed final allocation for 2018. The Housing and Human Services Advisory Board did approve this at their last meeting. And as I said before, tonight's the final public hearing. So if you want to hold that and then take some action, and what we'll do is if we get any additional comments through the comment period that runs through August 13th, we'll keep you informed and let you know, but no comments have been received to date so far. So, or I can answer any questions.
All right, well, thank you. Seeing that no one's in the queue, let's go ahead and open the public hearing on the 2018 CDBG and home action plan. Anyone here who would like to testify or speak? All right, seeing no one, let's close the public hearing. Can I have a motion from someone on council? Okay, Councilmember Finley. Quick fingers.
I move we accept this plan for 2018.
All right, seeing no further discussion, let's go ahead and vote. All right, that passes unanimously. Let's go back and look at 8B. And I guess the chair would advise, we've been talking about this for 2 years, and we are very well aware of what's in it. But go ahead.
All right. Thank you, Mayor, for your indulgence. So I will be brief, but just wanted to provide council with a overview at first reading. Obviously, there's more detail that's in the communication as well as the lengthy ordinance in your packet. we wanted to check in at first reading to see if council had any questions regarding the draft. Obviously, if council moves forward with the ordinance on first reading, it would be published per the charter in the Times Call. I will just want to mention that any revisions that would be made at second reading or that can't be made by tomorrow, given the length of the ordinance, that it would need to be republished after second reading, which would be fairly expensive. So just keep that in mind. Our thought or recommendation would be that if council has any suggested changes, that we look at perhaps bringing those back after the land development code is adopted for an additional, obviously we've got other batches of amendments to make as well, and we can make those at that time as well. Sorry, the publication cost is around $20,000, a little less than that. So again, as I mentioned, I'm going to be brief on this. Just want to give a quick overview. Since it's been a few months since we've had this before the council, as noted in your communication, we've had a number of meetings both with Planning Commission, the Downtown Development Authority, Planning and Zoning Commission. And so just wanted to give a little bit of project background, touch upon some of the future amendments that you'll be seeing in the near future, and then give a quick overview of some more substantive amendments, and then talk a little bit about the zoning map update as well. So as mentioned prior, that the main emphasis with respect to this update is to look at ways to implement the Envision Longmont and other city plans and policies such as the sustainability plan as well as the downtown master plan that was adopted in 2017. Obviously, the Envision Longmont plan, the growth framework plan, made some substantial changes in terms of land uses and land use categories, and so as part of that, with this update and looking at the zoning map update in our zoning districts, we wanted the code as part of this update to match those land use categories. Obviously, we're looking at opportunities to create innovative and quality development. It's been since 2001 since we did the last major update to the land development code. There have been some subsequent amendments, but obviously there's been changes in planning trends and development patterns that necessitates us looking at this in addition to the need for implementing the Envision plan as well. And then just overall, we wanted to make the code more user-friendly in terms of organization and the ability for people to find standards in our code in terms of understanding processes, and then just making our standards and processes more predictable. Just briefly, as noted in more detail in the communication, there was a number of groups, organizations, and individuals that were involved that we presented information to as part of this update process. I wanted to say thanks to all the individuals and groups who provided input and participated, and I know some of them are obviously here this evening. Obviously, our goal was to get out and get the word out to as many as possible as part of to let them know about the proposed changes with the update. And then just a quick mention in terms of future land development code amendments. Good news, obviously, there was more work to be done. Council get a chance to see future amendments in the not too distant future. Actually, some of those will be coming back to you fairly soon. And some of these amendments are outside of the scope of our original update to the land development code, and so that's why we're bringing these back as a second batch of amendments. So the first one, as mentioned, you'll be seeing, obviously you've been discussing this recently, is the affordable inclusionary housing. That'll be coming forward to you soon. Protection of river streams, riparian areas, wetlands, habitat, and species. That's another area that staff noted that we'd be bringing back for future amendments. One of the amendments that's actually in the draft, though, that council mentioned recently, I believe in June, was a request for the process, any request to or a reduction in terms of the setback to the riparian streams and wetlands setback would come to City Council as opposed to being reviewed by staff and or the Plan and Zoning Commission. So we've incorporated that amendment into this draft. And then as part of these future amendments, we'll be looking at additional changes. Obviously, we want to take into consideration recent updates to the open space plan, as well as the planned update to the wildlife management plan as well. And then we recently kicked off an update to our city standards and construction specifications, and that's kind of the standards that address improvements in the public realm. And that's something that'll be coming back to you probably early part of next year with an update with respect to those standards. And we will be transitioning to the 2018 building fire codes, and so we're working on that currently, and that'll be coming back for adoption later this year, probably in December, for City Council's consideration. Originally, we had planned to incorporate a chapter into the Land Development Code update regarding historic preservation. That's something that going to take a little bit more time, and so we anticipate bringing that back. We've gotten some good input from the Historic Preservation Commission, as well as other interested parties in the community regarding the Historic Preservation chapter. The goal was to incorporate that into the Land Development Code so it's more visible than where it currently is in the municipal code. We've got some feedback from the Downtown Development Authority as well as some of the surrounding neighborhoods about looking at potential updates to downtown parking standards, and that's something that we're going to be looking at. I've been having conversations with Kimberly McKee and Phil Greenwald, our transportation planner, about looking at options with respect to parking in the downtown. And then we've been working with outside counsel regarding some changes in terms of agreements and licensing, but also potential updates to our wireless telecommunications chapter and sections specifically related to updates to the Federal Communications Act. And then this isn't immediate, but it's been a while since we talked about fire and emergency response and our transportation benchmarks. That's a couple of policy discussion items we'd like to bring back at some point with council. And then we're just kicking off a Main Street Corridor plan, and recommendations that come out of that Main Street Corridor plan may dictate some additional revisions to the Land Development Code. One other thing I just also wanted to mention was I know couple of months ago, council had requested that staff take a look at the sustainability plan evaluation system. And we recently had a conversation with staff that's been involved with the sustainability plan and put together the evaluation system. And we're starting to discuss how our land development code ties in with the sustainability plan, and looking at how our existing and proposed development standards as well as our review criteria could fit within that sustainability evaluation system. And we're looking at coming back for a discussion topic with council in the near term. So just wanted to update you on that as well. So moving on, again, major areas that we're part of this update were the zoning districts and use regulations, development standards and the sign code, as well as administration and procedures. As noted in the communication, some of those areas, and particularly development procedures, were reorganized a couple of years ago in 2015, and we're making some tweaks and updates in terms of trying to create or develop those sections so they're a little bit more user-friendly. Briefly on the zoning districts, some of the main points with respect to zoning districts are districts are being consistent with the envisioned land use categories. We've consolidated districts. We've established new mixed-use districts. We're simplifying the PUD districts. And then as I mentioned, we're consolidating districts from 29 existing zoning districts down to 17. In terms of some of the dimensional standards, lot and building standards with respect to the zoning districts chapter, the intent is to align the density ranges with the envisioned density. Also, building height allowances within envision. That also incorporates some allowances for additional types of development that we're trying to encourage in our community, whether that's affordable housing or vertical mixed use or development near transit centers. And so those developments potentially could be able to have additional building height as part of their incentives for developing those preferred types of developments. This is just one example of the revised tables and graphics that were incorporated into the zoning district chapter. The intent obviously is to make it more user-friendly and simplify the information that's presented to the public and for staff to use. And then moving on, use regulations are in chapter 1504. Since we updated substantially the zoning districts, we wanted to also look at the use regulations and look at opportunities to reorganize and simplify those so that they were more user-friendly and intuitive as well. I will note that I think from the standpoint of simplification, we updated our use tables, and I think they're currently stretched over like 30 pages, and now they're down to 5 pages, so that's a plus. We did add secondary uses based on the Envision Longmont. It talks about support uses in the various zoning district categories, and we have some standards regarding secondary uses that address compatibility and adequate land supply standards. And then we're also incorporating some use-specific standards as part of the use regulations that address appropriate location scale, mix of uses, and different types of activities. And then I just wanted to note, I know we talked about this a while ago, and I believe it was last February, about short-term rentals, where we got some specific direction from City Council, and those standards have been incorporated into the draft. And just for a reminder, for City Council, and these are consistent with the recommendations that also came from Visit Longmont in terms of the types of dwellings that would be allowed, the occupancy limits, inspection requirements, the limit on the number of short-term rentals in the single-family neighborhoods. And so if you have any questions about those, I'm happy to respond. Let's see. So this is just one example of the partial one page of the use table, just to clean it up, make it a lot more user-friendly in terms of organization. And then in terms of the development standards, again, a few of the things, I'm just going to touch upon a few highlights. One was simplifying the landscape standards. Either we talked a little bit about that at a previous discussion about how we might be able to look at opportunities to simplify things and look at opportunities to potentially reduce costs for developments. And so one of the things that we discussed with council previously was to remove the common open space percentages, but still keep those things that make developments attractive, whether that's landscape buffers or pocket parks or other types of landscaping features that create usable open space as opposed to just have a specific percentage that you need to meet. And we think that the benefit of doing this change is that in almost all instances that it'll help to reduce not only the installation costs but the ongoing maintenance costs associated with landscaping as well by reducing the number of plant materials that are required. And I know we've gotten some feedback from developers as well as landscaping consultants about that particular issue as well. In terms of the parking standards, we added the use table to match up with the parking standards so it's more user-friendly so people don't have to ask us, interpret the existing use table as much. So I think that'll certainly help. And then the last 3 bullet items are addressed in the next few slides. So in terms of building design, we expanded and enhanced the building design standards, particularly for multifamily developments. Our current standards regarding multifamily developments is not very specific, and it's open to interpretation, so we incorporated some additional standards. But we also wanted to allow a little more flexibility in terms of options for building design. Obviously, we want to have quality development in our community, but allow flexibility for building. So we created some options for people to pick from different types of building elements or architectural elements that they could select from to create that quality design. And then obviously one topic, and you've heard from some of the folks from the historic East Side neighborhood, is that one topic that garnered a considerable amount of interest was the new section on residential compatibility. Based upon our prior discussions on this particular topic, we've updated that to address and incorporate some additional standards for the downtown area as well as other areas outside of the downtown. And then in terms of the sign regulations, three main focuses with respect to the sign regulations. Based on the outcome of 2015 Supreme Court ruling, we had to address content-based regulations and remove those out of our existing sign code. And then another goal was to consolidate and simplify our sign regulation tables, and we've achieved that. We've reduced the number of tables substantially, similar to our use tables. And then also just adding flexibility and incentives for creative sign designs with respect to designs, not only in the downtown, which in the packet is a update to the downtown sign design standards, but community-wide as well. Obviously, the goal is to have quality signs as well as quality buildings in our community. So just briefly on the administrative procedures, as I mentioned before, we had updated this section, the development procedures, in 2015, but we added some additional information and particularly wanted to add some flow charts regarding process. We revised our PUD procedures, and I'll touch upon that just briefly in the next slide. We added an administrative manual that allows staff to make some modifications in terms of submittal requirements without having to go back through a code amendment. We consolidated the administrative modifications into this one particular chapter, and then we also updated our nonconformities, enforcement, and penalties sections so they're easier to interpret. I know it was mentioned earlier about notice in terms of how we notice applications. Obviously, in the draft code, we have our continued written notification that's mailed out to surrounding property owners within a certain distance. We also have the ability to notify other people who live in the area other than property owners. For example, if there's a large apartment complex and we feel that potentially a project could potentially affect them as well, we can notify all the renters in a particular project as well. But some of the other things that we've been discussing about, and I know this was discussed by council as well a couple months ago, was looking at opportunities beyond that written notification of how we might be able to get the word out to the public in terms of just development applications or plans or projects that are in the works. And so that's something staff has been exploring, and I'm sure we'll come back to council with some ideas and for consideration and discussion soon. I know we've been looking at options with respect to how to better utilize the city website, our GIS, and our existing database in terms of our development applications, in terms of doing having people opt in or subscribe to that service and be able to get information out, be able to look at plans that are online as well. And if plans change, they'd be able to open up the plans online and be able to look at any revisions that have been made. So obviously email is another opportunity as well as social media. So that's something that we're certainly taking a look at and want to do a better job of getting information out to the community on applications. So just briefly, I'm getting close to wrapping this up. On the PUD procedure, obviously we currently have a lot of PUDs in our current zoning districts. One of the goals with this update was to convert some of those where it made sense, and actually we're planning to convert quite a few of those. Just to simplify the whole process, we think that with our update and flexibility with regard to some of our dimensional standards, that I think we're going a long way towards accommodating that goal of reducing and minimizing the number of PUDs. And then another thing in terms of the overall development plan, which is currently called a preliminary PUD plan, one of our goals is to simplify the details that are required with an overall development plan, so that this will help reduce both the time and cost and investment before you get before a public hearing process, as opposed to getting every detail correct and everything worked out from an engineering standpoint. We feel that we should be able to get an overall development plan up in front of the public bodies for review and consideration without going overboard in terms of the amount of detail that's required. Obviously, final development plans or final site plans, obviously we'd have to have all the engineering detail, but at least to get to the public hearing stage, I think one of our goals is to kind of simplify that process a little bit. All right, moving on. So obviously, as part of the update, we have been updating the zoning map as well. And so the incentive or the impetus behind the update to the zoning map was the update to the Envision Longmont land use map that was adopted by council in 2016. And so what we did was use the Envision land use map as a starting point, and then looked at those areas of change and areas of stability with respect to what made sense in terms of the revisions to the updated zoning map. And so the next slide reflects the proposed zoning map that's in your packet. It's also online if anybody wants to take a look at that. The land use category, or sorry, the zoning districts, both the nomenclature as well as the locations for the zoning districts match up very closely with the land use designations on the Envision Longmont land use map. So I'm just going to touch briefly on some of the more recent annexations that council has reviewed, both that have been recently recorded as well as that are pending or conditionally approved. And so there's 4 that were recently recorded: Nova, HMS, Rogers Road, the St. Vrain Valley School District, Quail Road, and Irwin Thomas. Those are all recently recorded, and so we converted the zoning with those annexations to be consistent with the new lineup of zoning districts. And then in the ordinance, the adoption ordinance for the couple of pending annexations, the neighbors Redmond and South Flatland, which are both along Rogers Road, that when those come forward for recordation, when they meet their conditions of approval, then the zoning will be converted and be reflected on the zoning map for the new zoning districts for those annexations. So, next steps. So assuming council's okay moving forward, we're planning to have a public hearing on August 14th. In the draft, the effective date of the Land Development Code would be September 1st. Obviously, as I mentioned before, there's the next batch of amendments I'll be coming forward to you in the near future. Obviously, there's been, as we've had pre-application meetings over the past 3, 4, 6 months, we've had a number of applicants that are interested in waiting on the Land Development Code to be adopted so that they can submit their applications and take advantage of the new zoning and the standards that are part of that development code. And I just will note, obviously I was involved with the last major update in 2001 with the Land Development Code, and you're not going to get everything quite right with a major update. And so there will be some fine tuning over time as we get feedback and staff takes a look at it and see what's making sense or doesn't make sense. So obviously over time we'll come back to the council and kind of fine tune things as they need be. So just wanted to mention that as well. So with respect to that, last slide. So we posted, obviously it's the council packets up online. We also have on the planning webpage all the code update information and the draft code as well. So if people are interested in taking a look at that, as well as the zoning map. So hopefully I didn't run too long. If you have any questions, I'm happy to respond to them.
Looks like there's one. Mayor Pro Tem? Or maybe you're making a motion?
I'm the only one?
Nope. Here comes a few more. All right.
I have a few questions. But I think I'll just come see you because I'm quite sure I'm the only person here interested in cabinet signs and color palettes and shielded lighting and, idiotic things like that. Anyway, I do want to bring up a few things. I could not find an explanation of the appeals process. It sort of keeps referring to section 1502.040K, and I can't find that section anywhere. It doesn't go up to K. So I'm looking at page...
So it is on page, sorry, pardon me, I got to get my glasses.
Pardon?
I just had to get my glasses
Okay.
out, apologize. On the Land Development Code, it's in chapter 1502.040, and it's K, it's on page 18, where the appeals section starts. And I'm referring to the page number at the bottom of the page on
Yeah,
the
I know.
document.
Okay.
So-
Okay. What I'm looking at is the bottom of page 26, which refers to that section of 1502.040K. But anyway, okay, I'll look at that. All right, the other thing I wanted to talk about is the affordable housing, because as you know, we haven't quite passed that yet.
Right.
I mean, we have okayed it, but we haven't passed the final measure. So there is no, we haven't had a discussion on the incentives. The incentives were there in an attempt to get developers to build affordable housing, and they did not build one unit. However, now they are kind of, in one case, using expedited process to ram through something that won't even come to city council, apparently. So I do think we need to look at that pretty quickly in terms of by right ordinances, expedited review, and administrative approval. Those are three things that we that we gave as incentives that we need to reconsider how we're going to deal with those. I don't know if this city code is the place to put this, but where would we discuss radon mitigation? Because radon is the second or third cause of lung cancer in the United States, and there's a great deal of it in Longmont, and we don't have any regulation about it at all.
So, as I mentioned before, as part of the update to the Building and Fire Code, that we're looking at going to the 2018 codes, and so we'll be coming back to City Council later this fall for a discussion regarding those updates, and I believe a discussion about radon would be appropriate in conjunction with the building codes.
That sounds good. And just one other little thing for now anyway. You have forbidden printing and publication stores on Main Street. Why? That means graphic designers, by the way, because that is publication.
So, good question. We had a conversation with the DDA board, Downtown Development Authority Board. Obviously, their interest in conjunction with the update to the downtown master plan was to have active spaces on the ground floor along Main Street. And so we can certainly take a look at that if there is an opportunity to make some tweaks. Obviously, we just didn't want to have a print shop that was there that wasn't necessarily open to the public. So if there's an opportunity to word that it's a business that's open to the public as opposed to just perhaps maybe a print shop or publishing shop that's just, that doesn't have an active space or public entrance or whatever that might be. So I can have that conversation with Kimberly and the DDA board. But I know the intent was to try to focus on those types of uses that would create active uses, particularly on the ground floors in the downtown.
Okay. I think I understand, but I think that people are a little behind the times in understanding what publication is.
So Dan was helpful. He did mention that we actually do allow it in the mixed-use downtown printing, publish, and production facility. It's a permitted secondary use.
Okay, I misunderstood.
Thanks, Dan.
All right, never mind. Thank you. Thank you, Dan. And I also wanted to say this is just a really excellent update. It is so much clearer to understand and to read and to go through, and the drawings and the tables, reducing like a 40-page bunch of tables to 5 is, that's the direction we need to head. And I know how much work that takes. So thank you very much on the part of legal and all kinds of people. So thank you very much for this update.
Thank you.
Councilmember Martin.
Thank you, Mayor Bagley. I just wanted to reinforce a point made by Dr. Clark in the public invited to be heard about notifications and subscriptions and stuff. And I just want to put a point in favor of push-style notifications where a person subscribes, a resident subscribes, an interested party subscribes, and then they get a notification. It is much more effective to do it that way than to put stuff on a Facebook page or put stuff on the website, because then a person has to look at the right time, and that's not what they need.
Yeah, and I agree with the that option to opt in. So certainly look at that. Thank you.
Councilmember Rodriguez.
Thank you, Mayor Bagley. Again, I'd also like to echo the commendations to the staff about doing a great job with this plan code update. My one issue is actually just based on some of the very brand new language that was put in as far as the council making decisions upon riparian areas, wetlands and such. I think that we should also give similar consideration to city-owned parks and open space applications that are adjacent to city-owned parks and open space, and just expand that language to have a council, again, be the deciding body in those circumstances specific, again, to city-owned properties. And so I actually would move to make that small change in that language, and that's the only thing.
That was a motion, thus the word move. The Dr. Waters?
Well, second. I was going to make some other comments, but do we want to deal with this motion?
Yeah, let's go ahead.
Yeah.
I guess I don't see anybody else in the queue. I guess my, as it stands now, will it go to P&Z and then have the opportunity to come to us, or is it going to go straight to us?
So
it goes to P&Z, then to us, right?
Yes, P&Z recommendation.
Okay, so we're just a safety net, theoretically.
And are you saying you want that to come with the update on the riparian information, because that's coming later, correct, Brian?
So I feel those are more about protections versus just the decision-making process. I think that was where I was kind of thinking that this would be more of appropriate for this section versus the actual, because the parks plan is separate and the open space plan is separate, right, in concept.
So I might need some clarification on specifically where you want to have that language added.
It would just expand, so I believe it was
1505-020?
Yeah. It's essentially the same exact concept, just expanding to city-owned parks, open spaces, riparian, yada, yada. The city council will become the decision-making body, and planning and zoning will be a recommending body.
I guess the chair has a question for the attorney. If we were to if this motion passes, does this push off second reading?
It wouldn't necessarily if we can make the change by tomorrow, but I'm trying to think, because right now, in terms of the section on protection of river streams, wetlands, riparian areas, subsection F talks about setbacks, and then there's specific setbacks from those particular areas of interest, river streams, wetlands, riparian areas. In the section that currently does not mention parks and open space.
I guess a suggestion would be, instead of changing it tonight, could we maybe have the motion to add it to the amendments list? And we could put it on when we deal with these amendments?
I just feel it's actually simpler than actually outlining the 150-foot setbacks. And that's why I was thinking it would be more appropriate than actually being so specific as to dealing with the protections. Because the protections will come later.
So I apologize for being a little dense on this, but
so it'd be applications adjacent to essentially.
So any development application adjacent to a public park or open space would have to go through, even if it were permitted use, it would have to come before Planning and Zoning Commission and City Council.
No,
I'm talking about applications that are triggered by planning, that would be at Planning and Zoning.
Okay.
If that makes, there's obviously a trigger that has to come in front of Planning and Zoning. Right. Not just laissez-faire carte blanche, or on every single application.
So an application. So for example, types of applications that automatically go to Planning and Zoning Commission: conditional uses, preliminary subdivision plats, overall development plans. Those are the main examples. Things that don't require an ordinance approval by City Council, those conceivably could be just approved by Planning and Zoning Commission. They're subject to appeal to City Council. Are you asking that any of those types of applications that are adjacent to a city park or open space would need to come before the City Council after a recommendation from Planning and Zoning Commission?
That's the suggestion.
I guess
that might take a little bit more time than our ability to get that drafted by tomorrow.
We do have a motion on the floor. Is there any, Councilmember, let's limit questions, comments to this specific motion just for the meantime. Councilmember Finley?
Thank you, Mayor Bagley. Would this trigger the $20,000 reprint?
Well, if we can't get it redrafted by tomorrow in time for publication by Friday.
It would?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Councilmember Peck.
Thank you, Mayor Bagley. This question for Aaron, actually. There are two sections. One of them is the 150-foot setback for the riparian area, and then the 100-foot setback for rivers and streams. Are you suggesting that we, for any public amenity, include that in the 150-foot setback or the 100-foot setback from any public amenity? And I'm thinking, let's just take McIntosh Lake as an example. There's a lot of open space there. Which part of that are you saying we should add these public amenities to?
I would say that the impetus of the motion was really to give similar consideration to our parks and open spaces that we do give to our greenways. As far as the decision-making process for development, was not trying to trigger a separate $20,000 printing job by any concept. So if there's some sort of creative solution, I'm open to friendly amendments.
Again, I would just suggest we just make an amendment that will come up in a couple of weeks. Go ahead, Eugene, what do you want to do? What's your advice?
Mayor and Council, Eugene May, City Attorney. I'd like to draw your attention to Council Rule of Procedure, Rule 16, motion to amend an ordinance or resolution. States a motion to amend an ordinance or resolution shall be made with such specificity to ensure that city staff can accurately make amendments. Where appropriate, motion to amend will state the words proposed to be stricken out and those to be inserted. I'm conferring with Dan Kramer, who worked on this ordinance, and we're not exactly, I think the purpose of this rule was to not have concept amendments, but rather have specific language amendments. And I'm concerned with something that has the consequences here, that translating that concept into an actual amendment to the ordinance would present a challenge that we don't want to rush for a publication that's going to cost $20,000. So if you do have ideas about specific language to the ordinance change that you'd like to see, we'd be happy to look at that. Maybe we could work on that over a break, or, you know, I'd like to implement, but I'm not sure that we can convert that concept into a code amendment in the time given.
Councilmember Rodriguez.
Thank you, Mayor Bagley. Due to some of the unforeseen applications that are triggered in front of P&Z, I think more time is needed to suss out the specific language for a said amendment. So I guess I remove my motion at this time.
Do you want to make a motion to make it an official amendment so we actually address it when you've had a chance to think about it?
I move that we add that to the amendment list for consideration at a future time.
Bunch of people seconded it. All right, no further discussion. Let's vote. And that passes unanimously. Okay, let's move on to general business. Do we? Well, okay, we do. Do we have a motion? Can we have a motion, please, Dr. Waters?
I'll move. Can I do two things? I was going to.
You can do three, Dr. Waters. I just wanted a motion.
I was going to do it. I wasn't going to make a motion, but I will. But let me do this first. Let me just add a team, because I know this was a team effort, and I appreciate your time yesterday, Brian, to help me with my questions. It would be helpful to me. You had a slide early in your presentation, and the next to the last slide, which were kind of iterations of the items that are come back. Kind of this whole idea of the amendments. We talked yesterday about tiny wheels on homes, and I mean there were some other things, a couple of other ideas. If you could share that list in a format that we could then think about when we would calendar those. I mean, I realize you got a ton of stuff now to follow up on, and this is going to have to be timed, and there's a natural sequence to some of it with affordable housing coming on the heels of this. But next Tuesday, I think, Sandy just left, we're going to have a chance to see a work plan that lines up with the vision statements and goals on which we worked on the 18th of May. And that's my understanding we're going to get a chance to adopt those. Is that true? There she is. And I'm just assuming that there's some of the follow-up, the timing of that ought to be reflected or somehow coordinated with that work plan. So it'd be helpful to me, so I don't start pinging the city manager from time to time, where is this one and when is it? If we could just lay dates on those follow-ups and fold it into the overall work plan, that would be really helpful. Okay. And with that, if you'll do that, I'll move approval.
Whoa, that was powerful. That was good politic in there. Do I have a second? All right, it's been moved and seconded. Is there any other questions, comments, or concerns regarding this ordinance? All right, let's vote. All right, is Joni Marsh here? All right, I was going to say, get ready to catch her when she faints. It passes unanimously. All right, let's go ahead now and move on to general business. And by the way, yes, on behalf of all the council, staff did, how long was it, 2 years? 2.5? Anyway, it was a long time. Consultants, staff, attorneys, all departments, just bravo. Look forward to those amendments. All right, let's go ahead and move on to general business. Can we have a motion to recess the Longmont City Council and reconvene as the Board of Directors of the Longmont General Improvement District Number 1? I have a second? Thank you. Let's vote. All right, this is resolution LGID 2018 oops, sorry. I know, I'm getting in there. That passes unanimously with Bonnie not voting, but I'm sure she would have if she could have. She tried. Let the record reflect that her thumbs got in the way. It passes unanimously, right? Is that yeah. Okay, this is Resolution LGID 2018-02, a resolution of the Board of Directors of the Longmont General Improvement District Number 1, approving a non-binding memorandum of understanding with the Boulder County Housing Authority, the Longmont Downtown Development Authority, and RLET Properties, LLC for the redevelopment of 518 Kaufman Street to a mixed-use affordable housing and office development. Do we have a staff presentation?
Thank you. Mayor Council Sean Lewis, Assistant City Manager. Just wanted to brief you on the progress on this exciting project. As you know, a couple of years ago, the city released a request for expressions of interest to the private sector to try to solicit a developer who might be interested in partnering with the city, the Longmont Downtown Development Authority, and the county to redevelop the west half of the block of the 500 block of Kaufman. It's actually on the east side of Kaufman, but it's the west half of that block. Unfortunately, that particular RFEI did not produce any folks who stepped up at that time. So as fate would have it, we were in discussions with the Boulder County Housing Authority on some other issues. They said that they, in fact, would be interested. And so we started discussing just some principles on how we could structure a redevelopment agreement. We all agreed that it would make more sense to include the private sector owner, Cotton Burden, who owns the property on the south end of that block, to really have a more impactful development. And so what you have in front of you tonight is a memorandum of understanding that is non-binding, but it really does kind of lay out what the process would be, how this could be structured with a parking garage that would be shared by all, which we think is the most efficient way to do parking on this part of the downtown. It would have affordable housing that would be owned and operated by the Boulder County Housing Authority. And Nori Boyd with the Housing Authority is here tonight if you have questions for them. They would act essentially as the developer with the garage and, of course, their spaces. We would be essentially contributing land. You, as the GID, would be contributing land to that project, and the DDA would have funding and some just funding that would go into that, and then the private developer would agree to develop a brand new, pretty large office development on the south end of that block. So some really exciting opportunities that could really transform what's now a surface parking lot and a very old, outdated building on the south end of that block. So we'd be glad to answer any questions that you may have.
Councilmember Martin.
Thank you, Mayor Bagley. I just want to clarify, mostly for the public, to get this into the public record, is that this project was presented to the City Council in a joint meeting with the Boulder County Commissioners. So that's why there's not a detailed presentation tonight. But if anyone has more, wants to have more information about this, it is a matter of public record in that meeting. And if somebody remembers the date of it, I would be happy to have them supply it, but I don't remember.
Mayor Pro Tem Christensen.
Thank you, Councilwoman Martin, for clarifying that. So my question is, this sounds like it's sort of in the middle of, or at a very preliminary stage, because it says 50 to 80 units at 60% and below, and 150 to 200 parking spaces. So that's kind of a lot of leeway. So that's going to be clarified as time goes on?
Yes, Mayor Bagley, Mayor Pro Tem Christensen, that's exactly right. This is really a preliminary first step. Once, if you all adopt this, which will be followed by the county commissioners acting as the board for the Boulder County Housing Authority, once both of us approve this, because it's already been signed by the DDA and by the private sector partner, once we all have agreed to that, then we'll start negotiations on a development agreement that'll really get down into more of those development details. They're really, the Housing Authority has to flesh out. Because obviously, to make this work, they're going to need tax credits as part of that. That's somewhat up in the air with the state, that they'll have to apply for those, as I understand. Certainly, Nori can probably provide more details about that. But yes, it's very preliminary. It's a little open-ended, but there have actually been some public meetings already on this that the Housing Authority has had with the neighborhood to talk about concepts and that sort of thing. But as far as an exact design or number of units, et cetera, that hasn't been nailed down. I did fail to mention this would also have office uses on the ground floor, which is also a plus.
Will there be, I think this is a great coalition between public and private, and especially if Cotton Burton is involved, because he really understands that whole area of town. And I was wondering if the garage is going to be underground as it is with Cotton Burton's development.
Mayor Bagley, Mayor Pro Tem Christensen, currently, as we've been discussing it, it is not an underground garage, but the way it's being designed, it could actually be converted to residences or offices in the future. So that was a change that I think the commissioners asked for, and then I think you all might have brought that up in the joint meeting, which, by the way, I'm told was June 28th. Okay. Response to Councilmember Martin's question. So it is not an underground garage as currently planned, but that could change. But we are planning on trying to build that to where it can be converted to residences or apartments later.
Okay, thank you.
Councilmember Martin?
Thank you, Mayor Bagley. I just quickly like to say that I'm deeply in love with that parking garage, the way it's in the concept design now, because not only does it address some immediate needs for additional parking as well as additional affordable housing in the downtown area, all of which is, speaks to known requirements about the way the downtown development needs to go, but it can be repurposed later when parking needs decrease. So I just want to call that out, that this is really an excellent concept design.
Well, if you love it that much, why don't you make a motion? Move resolution. You just move the resolution. You want to hit your... Oh.
I move the resolution. Thank you very much.
We have a second? All right. Seeing no further discussion, let's vote. All right. That passes unanimously. Do I have a motion to adjourn to the Board of Directors of the Longmont General Improvement District Number 1 and reconvene as the Longmont City Council?
So moved.
Great. Let's vote. That passes unanimously. I don't know about you guys, but it just seems like forever since we've convened as City Council. It's been just so long. All right, we're back, people. I know you were worried. Let's go on to 11B and talk a little bit about the food tax rebate program. We all doing okay? We're coming up on an hour and 20 minutes. We all right? Okay.
Mayor Bagley, members of the council, Jim Golden, Chief Financial Officer, and this item is on the food tax rebate program that the council asked us a couple of weeks ago to bring back some information on. And got it here. So I wanted to open up with some information first on the impact of the food tax exemption that's been proposed. Last month, we put together some information as a preliminary estimate of the impact of it. It was about $7.2 million. What that was based on at that time, first you need to understand that the city doesn't have that information typically in its records because our grocery vendors are not taking that exemption. They're reporting their total sales to us. So they're not telling us how much of those sales are for food for home consumption. So what we did is we contacted each of those vendors and asked them to give us an estimate of how much that was, and we did receive feedback. There's about, let's say, 14 or so food outlets. Some of them are more than, like, say, King Supers has 3 of those 14. So we were hearing back from 9 or 10 different businesses, and we had heard back from about half or less of those when we gave the first estimate of $7.2 million. So we took what we heard back from those 4 or so vendors, and we applied that percentage across all of our grocery sales records from the previous year, from 2017. Apply the new tax rate and a projection for 18, and that's how we got to 7.2 million. We continued to try to contact the remaining vendors to find out what that was, and you have to understand this is voluntary compliance. They're not required to give us that information. We were asking them for it, and so we weren't getting it all too quickly. We did finally receive from most of the rest of them last week, but also last week what we also received is we decided to contact the state. We have an agreement with the state that we can share sales tax information with each other as long as it's kept confidential. And so we asked the state about it because we wanted to see if they could just tell us what they were reporting for the exemption that they were taking on the state form. And so we did receive that information from the state last week, and we then turned and compared that to what we were receiving from all of the individual businesses. There was a lot of alignment amongst that for most of the businesses. One of the big differences for us was that we have to understand we have Target and we have Walmart and Sam's that are not just grocery stores. They're discount stores as well. And so we've traditionally taken their data and separated it for our reporting purposes between groceries and general, 2 different categories in our sales tax report. And we've done that based on what they have given us an annual estimate of what that would be. So what we found out last week is when we compared that information to what the state's information was, is what they were really giving us was what was the exemption for. They considered the groceries to be the amount that they are also taking as an exemption at the state level for food for home consumption. So basically, 100% of the revenue that we were recording as grocery sales from those businesses is really going to be exempted because it's food for home consumption. Doesn't mean that they don't also sell other types of food, prepared food, but we actually have those falling into the general category based on what they were giving us in the past. So that really revised what we were estimating for those 4 outlets. And so that was a significant change. Between that and some differences that we also had to reconcile with one of the other large groceries, we then came up with a new number. And since we're really talking about a proposal that will take effect in 2019, we converted these to our projections for 2019 revenues. And so that takes this totally up to $9.41 million, which is what I have up there for you. Which would actually have been, without the growth for 2019, it would have been about $9 million in 2018. So the breakdown now of the amount of the impact is on the general fund would be $4.53 million. The public improvement fund is about $800,000. Open space fund about $533,000. Streets fund is $2 million, and the public safety fund is $1.55 million impact. So I just wanted to update that for you since it's somewhat related to this topic. And now we'll move a little bit. So what we did is we gathered information from 2 entities that we were aware of that already have rebate tax rebate programs, either for Arvada's is called a resident tax rebate program, but it's geared in terms of the food, as well as Boulder's food tax rebate program. Statistics from Arvada, their population is 115,000. Their tax rate is 3.46. They do about 1,150 rebates annually. Annual rebate total is 120,000. The average rebate is $105. $85 rebate for an individual and $50 for each additional individual in a family or applicant. In Boulder, it's 108,000 population, a little bit higher tax rate. They've processed 920 rebates annually, rebated $100,000 last year, and average rebates $108. They have a little bit different. They rebate $83 for individuals or $253 for families. And they both have a 4-month period of time in which they administer these programs and take applications for rebates from the previous year's, essentially, theoretically, previous year's tax spending. So the eligibility options, again, this kind of combination, what we found out there, for certainly senior citizens are eligible. They'd use different minimum ages, 62 or 65. Disabled individuals are eligible. One of them had single that are aged from 55 to 65 if they're living alone, and then another single head of household if they had dependent children, whereas the other entity, Boulder, I believe it was, would do it for a family with children under 18 in the household. So both of them use the HUD annual income limits, which are based on 50% of median family income, which, by the way, is not the same. What I did put in the communication is actually the 2017 annual income limits. I labeled it 2018, but it was from 2017, and the program that they're rebating in 2018 is what that represents. This here is the 2018 HUD annual income limits for Boulder County. So there's different annual income limits for Arvada than it is for Boulder because they're in different areas. But this is the amount of and this is different from what is showing in your council communication, because this is the 2018 annual income limits, which if you were to put a program into place with using these for 2019 rebates, this is what we'd follow if we were to adopt the HUD annual income limits. So a couple of things about that is that it makes it easy for administration because these are updated automatically annually by HUD. It gives us, it's consistent with what we do with the city housing assistance programs. We use the same income eligibility. So we already qualify individuals who participate in the housing assistance programs, and so we might have an opportunity to take advantage of that and combine that process somehow to avoid some redundancy in qualification. So rebate amounts, just in general, you could decide if you were to do this, what type of or amount of rebate you would give. Based on our current sales tax rate of 3.53%, just gave some examples here of how much that is equal to in the amount of annual purchases. $85 of a rebate backs into $2,408 of purchases, and all the way to $250 here, which backs into a little over $7,000 of purchases. So if you were to do a similar size program with similar criteria and limits as Boulder, I would guess that our estimated rebates might be about $100,000. And of course, if you were to do with larger income levels or different broader qualifications, it would certainly be a larger amount of rebate, I would assume. We would expect that there will be some administrative expenses. We have a number of rebate programs currently. We try to administer them with volunteers at the senior center, and it's beginning to become a little bit too much for them to handle. We're starting to revisit how we're doing those. So I wouldn't want to say that we could do this just with volunteers and get away with it. I know that my staff wouldn't want me to just assign them another program and tell them that we can do it without new resources. So this is just an estimate of needing some potentially temp staff during 4 months of the year if we were to administer it like the other two entities do. What we could do, if you're interested in this, we could certainly put together an ordinance, possibly within the next 2 months. We also would need to include the cost of the program within the 2019 proposed budget, and then we could implement it in 2019 as well. So looking for council direction, first off, whether you want to implement a food tax program, rebate program, and if so, what eligibility criteria and what potentially how much of a rebate would you be interested in. Haven't really had any other time to pursue any of the other ideas that I heard came up last week. It would certainly be, I'm not ruling anything out of the possibility, but certainly it's easier to do what's in place in those other cities. But if we wanted to create something new, we could certainly look into it. Might take a little longer for us to pull that off, but we could still get it in place for 19, I would think.
I guess just trying to move things along, might get shut down, but I move that we direct staff to prepare an ordinance implementing a food tax rebate program for Longmont, utilizing the HUD annual income limits as mentioned in their presentation. Specifically, it was the 50% of the median family income at some point within the next 2 to 3 months or as their schedule would permit. All right, Councilmember Peck.
Thank you, Mayor Bagley. Jim, could you go back to the slide that says this one? You said that the amount of money is equal to the amount of purchases. Are these purchases food only, or is it annual purchases from grocery stores?
Well, this theoretically, I was just trying to say that an $85 backs into a taxable purchase of $2,408. So you would theoretically be saying that if you're trying to give an exemption in lieu of give a rebate in lieu of an exemption for food for home consumption, then you're assuming it's $2,408 of purchases of food for home consumption. But it's just a for instance. It's just trying to give you a sense.
Okay, and kind of the 4-month thing. Are you saying that if you keep your receipts for 2018, it will take, in 2019, those rebates will take 4 months to mail back? Or I didn't understand that.
No, actually, I'm sorry. I should have probably been specific about that. So neither one of these programs require anyone to bring receipts. They just need to qualify, meet the criteria for qualification that I went through there. And then if they qualify, they would automatically get, based on size of the family and however you set those rebates, they would automatically get that level of a rebate. So no one needs to submit receipts or keep receipts.
What was the 4 months?
It's just they leave their program open for 4 months so that someone can put in an application for 4 months and then gets reviewed. Do they meet the criteria? They'll rebate the tax. So if they don't apply for it within that 4-month window, then the program's done for that year.
Okay. I think a rebate program is okay, but I think there might be better ways to do this. So I don't want to vote for this tonight. And that's, I would rather have discussion on different methods of helping people with the tax on food. So I'm going to vote against it only because I would like discussion on other methods. So.
All right, Councilman Martin.
With the eligibility criteria that you are using, would this cover the same set of people who are eligible for SNAP, or is it a superset of people who are eligible for SNAP?
Mayor Bagley, members of council, so I would think this is going to be a larger level than the amount that are eligible for SNAP. So, I talked to Kathy Fedler about these HUD income limits, and I think you've seen some data previously, and she did just give me a handout tonight that you've seen before, but it does cover, give you an idea of how many households in Longmont fall underneath these income guidelines. And so we have 3,763 households at 30% of median income, and 2,558 households at 50% of median income. So I think that's probably a larger amount than what's eligible for SNAP.
Okay, and then when you were assuming the cost to the city, were you assuming that everyone who was eligible would apply, and if not, what application rate did you assume?
Mayor Bagley, members of council, I really just looked at what the rebate rate was, and which would be also the rate of application in those other entities with larger populations than us. So it really, as I said before, it's really going to depend on if we have different level of criteria, different level of rebates, and of course we could have a different level of participation here. So it's really hard to estimate the amount of the rebate. It might be sensible to budget a little bit greater in the first year in case we have a much larger turnout in Longmont.
Right, since we're better maybe at outreach to our populations than some other cities, we might get a much larger turnout, which would not necessarily be a bad thing because we like our population, right? Okay, thank you very much.
You bet.
Councilmember Rodriguez.
Thank you, Mayor Bagley. I think I'm going to kind of fall with Councilmember Peck on this one, that I feel it's a little premature to necessarily move towards an ordinance immediately tonight. I was the one that motioned to have this information brought forth, and I think it was really to get some concrete numbers compared to all the numbers that have been thrown at us over the last month or so. And so I'm going to probably decline to vote on that. I'll vote on the motion. I'll probably vote against the motion. Thank you.
All right, Dr. Waters.
Thank you, Mayor Bagley. So a couple questions. Jim, explain to me, I was tracking what you were presenting until you answered the question about receipts. So somebody qualifies based on income using the HUD criteria. How do we know how much they've spent on food, or do we care how much they've spent on food? At a certain income level, you automatically qualify for a rebate of X. Is that the way it works?
That is correct, Mayor Bagley, members of council. So we don't care how much they've spent on food.
Okay, so unrelated to that, but related to the first set of numbers, the $9.42 million. And I realize that's an estimate. I asked the city manager, last week or so, what percentage of our budget is personnel, and I think you said to me, Harold, 78%?
73.5.
So I'm just sitting here kind of rolling in my head. If we anticipate the removal of sales tax for every member of this community for food, removal of tax on food for every member of the community, is going to result in a $1 or $4.2 million reduction in revenues. I start to think about having been through these kinds of processes in other times of my life, like, well, okay, if you were just to apply that across the board, what's 73% of 9.41 or $2 million in terms of personnel, right? And then I start to do those numbers and think of how many more people we're going to create as eligible for this program, right? Because they would be losing their jobs if you approached it that way. I'm not suggesting you would. I'm just trying to, Or then I start to think about if you didn't reduce any personnel and you reduced 9.41 or $2 million of programs and services, who's going to be most affected? And then I think that conversation we had last Tuesday night about homelessness, about costs and time frames for development, about what we do or don't, all the great things we do through a community services office, and what we wouldn't do and who's going to be affected. And I keep coming back to the very people we're trying to help at the end of the day, are going to be most directly impacted by the loss of those revenues. So I think an ordinance directing staff to bring back an idea we need to move forward with. So I'm going to support that motion because we're not settling on a plan tonight. We've got many degrees of freedom, I think, to give direction on the specifics of it. But I'm just sitting here reflecting on the implications if we don't come up with a viable alternative and given at least our community some options, assuming the untaxed food initiative might qualify. I don't know if it does for the budget. But I just think we need to be really clear as we do this what the implications are if we don't, or if an ordinance, or not an ordinance, an initiative passes, and we are now going to be around this table deciding who's going to pay a price in terms of their employment or the services they receive from the city. So I'd like to see something. I'd like to move it forward. So I'm going to support the motion just to keep it moving forward.
Can I clarify a couple of things?
Only if you're not going to make me sound stupid.
Please talk. Go ahead, Harold.
Well, I just want to make sure. So when we talk about, and Jim, you can, if I'm wrong, tell me. The 9.4 million is in aggregate. So the 4.5 million with the general fund is really where that conversation comes into play. But when you look at things,
well, let me take you through all the funds. Because,
yeah, that's what I was about to do.
All right, because it's in the general fund, it's about 73.5% is for salary and benefits. In the public safety fund, it's probably a much higher percentage. I don't know that one off the top of my head, but I would think it's closer to 85 to 90% there. Public improvement fund, and the open space fund, neither one of those really is much or any for hardly any in the open space fund, but none in the public improvement fund for salary and benefits. And the street fund is probably about 50%, I'm guessing. So impact is lower, but still the point is clear.
Well, and to get specific, so as we've talked about, I mean, and we're talking budget issues anyway in general right now on other things that we're going to talk to you about next week. But so when you look at potentially an impact of the public safety fund, if council will remember, we just increased the public safety fund, and we had a number of officers and other things that were outlined in this. What we would do in that case is we would come in and say what we were planning for in the future, we couldn't do because of this. And so while it may not mean somebody today that's there or an operation, it means things that we pushed out when we ran that forward we couldn't do. So that would be that would be something you would see there on the street funds, 50% personnel, but you have a lot of projects. We would be talking about projects in terms of what's in the street fund and what we couldn't do. So it would be a mix of all of the above.
All right, we've got a motion. Let's go ahead and vote. You know, before don't wait. Just point of order. If this fails, it's done till the next executive legislative session. So vote wisely. Meaning in 18 months, meaning unless somebody moves to bring it back on the winning side. Threw you off, Valerie. Sorry. All right. All right, that passes with council members Finley, Bagley, Martin, Christensen, and Waters voting for, and council members Rodriguez and Peck voting against. All right, thank you very much.
Mayor, Council, I do want to follow up. I did also hear other potential implementation ideas. Is there anything specifically, as we're looking at this, that you would like us to examine?
I think it's just bring us back something and let's talk. That was my understanding. Mayor Pro Tem?
I would like us to examine an idea that Councilman Waters had about a pass, such as an eco pass, that someone could just present at the grocery store. I think that would facilitate it being less expensive to administer, and also would facilitate people who could benefit from it actually using it. Thanks.
Councilmember Peck.
Thank you, Mayor Bagley. My problem with the rebate program is that if we're actually going to help people with their food tax, we should look at a different option, because not many people actually apply for the rebates. They're too onerous. So I did like the idea of the of some kind of a card that could be handed out to people either through the Hour Center or through Karen Roney's programs, based upon the same HUD AMIs. I would just like to look at that before, and that was why I voted against it, the ordinance, because I just think if we're actually going to work to help people with their food tax, then we should reach as many people as we can without totally destroying our budget. So I agree. I would like to look at that program. Does this make sense to you, Jim, what we're talking about?
Sure. Mayor Bagley, members of council, it makes sense. I think, as I said before, I think it's going to be a little bit harder for us to put that together. I also think it's going to cost you more than $100,000 in rebates, so we will need to budget more for that, because you're talking about basically, instead of having people having to apply, that every purchase they make will be exempt. So I think the impact, we'll have to try to come up with an estimate of that, but that'll be hard to do. So.
Dr. Waters?
Thank you, Mayor Bagley. Yeah, I used that example the last time we met of the equivalent of a King Soopers card. Somebody interpreted that as promoting King Soopers or something. I wasn't necessarily doing that. But the technology exists to be able to do this, so it's an exemption as opposed to a rebate. So I'd like to, given what I don't know about the legalities, whether or not legally we can approach this in a way that if it increases the number of participants who are food insecure, then I'd like to increase the number of people who are food insecure. That's the intent. And that's, if I've said from day one, I think everybody here has said the same thing. That we would like to unburden and then deal with the consequences, unburden those who are food insecure, if we can do it, without doing damage to that same population, based on the kind of cuts we'd have to make. So somewhere between $100,000 and $9.4 million is going to be a number or an estimate. So I voted for this motion because we can get some options on the table and have more specific discussions about what the options are, what the legalities are, and get some reaction from the community. I'd love to hear. We've heard from advocates, and I appreciate their effort and their intent, from the Unfood Tax Group. I'd love to hear from others in the community who have a stake in this as well, and what they're thinking. Everybody would like to be unburdened of all their taxes, but that's not without consequence, and we ought to have a chance to talk about what those consequences are in a thoughtful way together before we get too much further into this.
And I guess what comes to my mind is, my personal opinion, one of 7, is that the easier this is, the better. And if someone is at a 50% of AMI, that's what, 25%? Is everyone in Longmont, 25% of the homes and families in Longmont are eligible, more or less? I personally think it'd be a lot easier. They spend, maybe it's not $2,302 or whatever the number is, but it's going to be between $2,100 and $2,500, and then whether they get $79 or $87, I guess I would propose not going through a lot of headache, creating extra bureaucracy. I think if we want to help people, we publicize it and we push it after it's available. The other thing is that the more work we do on this, again, I go back to, I really bought into the whole idea of at our retreat, focusing, and not just us, giving staff time to focus on the things that we decided were important. And if staff is going to be working over the next 2 months developing different options for something that will impact 900 families for a total of $100,000, that is 2 months and hours and staff time when they are not working on affordable housing, inclusionary zoning, transportation, the amendments to our land use code. This is a huge squirrel that was brought about by members of our public that came to a public invited to be heard and said, we're doing this, and next thing you know, we're chasing a squirrel. That's what I think. So I would want us to do it just as simply as possible, and then if it's whether they're going to get a $79 rebate or an $87 or a $79 tax avoidance, I can't think of the word right now, or a $80 rebate. I mean, in Spanish, me da lo mismo. It's all the same, and so that's what I'd push for, simplicity.
I think we've gotten an idea.
All right. Are there any other comments, questions, or concerns that haven't been addressed yet? Councilmember Martin?
Thank you, Mayor Bagley. I would just like to point out that there's maybe a disconnect here, which is if our problem is avoiding the application process, I don't know how people are going to get their little magic cards without an application process. So let's get that clear. And then the other thing that I think should be clear is that even if a card was involved somehow, it would still have to be administered as a rebate.
And also, there might be implications as to whether or not that rebate comes before or after bond obligations we have, etc. So anyway, Mayor Pro Tem. Okay. All right. Let's move on to the next one. 11C, consideration of a bonding question for funding capital projects for infrastructure repair and replacement projects. And I believe staff has a presentation. Let's take a 5-minute break. How long is this going to be? 3-4 minutes? I'm just kidding. Let's take a 5-minute break. I'm funny. Come on, Marcia. I'm funny. infrastructure repair and replacement projects. I believe staff has a presentation, but Councilmember Finley, do you have something that's pressing? I didn't think so. All right, Mr. Golden.
Mayor Bagley, members of council, Jim Golden once again. So on this item, a little background. We have used the city's public improvement fund to bond public facility type projects probably since 1990, if not earlier, but we did that for this facility as well as the Safety Justice Center and Library back then. But in 2000, we issued a bond that was paid for out of the Public Improvement Fund, and it was to fund the Museum and Cultural Center and the Rec Center, both out at Quail Campus, as well as improvements at Roosevelt Park for the Senior Center, the Memorial Building, and the pavilion out there. That bond was refunded in 2006, so basically we just refinanced it at a lower interest rate, and it will be paying off in May of next year, 2019. So for those of the council members who have been here for a couple of years have heard about this effort in the past, because we've first identified it a couple of years ago that we wanted to try to target the use of that dollars that are freeing up in the Public Improvement Fund for purposes of taking care of public facilities repair and replacement. We've got a number of projects that are addressing facilities that are aging in the city. They are not tied to any enterprise funds. They're facilities that are probably related to, I shouldn't say they're not tied to any enterprise funds because they are tied to one in the Gulf Fund as well. But they are also, some of them were initially, most of them were initially funded through the general fund to start, all but the U Creek Golf Course. All the other ones, including the Sunset and Twin Peaks golf courses, were all part of the general fund when they were first put together and put in place. And so those are all aging and need to be addressed. So we have a slate of projects that you're going to hear briefly about tonight. But our plan that we put into the CIP 2 years ago, targeted for 2019, was a bond that would be proposed to fund infrastructure repair and replacement. The bond projects, the 11 projects, add up to $32.2 million. These are the list of the projects, which I'm not going to read off because you're going to hear about them each here in a minute. Actually, I think I'm going to do is go straight to the projects, and then I'll wrap it up with some more detail on potential bonds. So this is an introductory slide to just tell you about what the city owns. We have 36 buildings built anywhere between 1892, that would be the one down there on the right, and in 2018, which is the one there on the left with the at the museum. So approximate value of the buildings are all $100 million, and assuming 50-year life cycle, we should really be spending about $2 million a year annually for upkeep. So with that, I'm going to begin to introduce, I'm going to have some staff members come up and tell you a little bit of information about each of these 11 projects, just so you get an idea of what they're about. So I'm going to start with Scott Snyder and the fire stations.
Mayor Bagley, members of council, my name is Scott Snyder. I work in support services in the Public Safety Department. I'm here tonight to brief you about the fire stations 2 and 6 needing replacement. On the screen is Fire Station 2, located in Mountain View and Hover. It was built in 1967.
And just out of curiosity, is Fire Station 2 and 6 one issue or 2 issues?
It's 2 separate.
All right, so I'm just keeping
items on the list.
Yeah, okay, cool.
In the 50 years since Station 2 was built, the intersection at Hover and Mountain View has been reconfigured and enlarged at least twice. Each time Mountain View became wider and was moved closer to the building, and the already narrow site became even smaller. One of the challenges with the current location is the proximity of the station driveway, which is located just west of the intersection with Hover. Vehicles turning west from southbound Hover do not see fire trucks entering Mountain View on their blind side until they are around the corner and accelerating. Westbound traffic on Mountain View cannot see trucks entering the street until they come around the station. This often creates a surprise situation for the public as well as our firefighters. To date, this has not resulted in any collisions, but many close calls. And oddly enough, the day I stood out there and took this picture, I had a car hanging a U-turn in traffic right in front of the building there. At 3,200 square feet, Station 2 is too small for current needs. In comparison, Station 3 on Pace Street is almost 12,000 square feet. When Station 2 was built, fire trucks were considerably smaller. Many of the engines at that time had open cabs and would easily fit through the 10-foot high doors. Most engines were about 25 feet long, and there was adequate room in the 35-foot deep garage to work around the vehicles. Longmont's newest engine is just shy of 38 feet long and 11.5 feet high. 8 years ago, we added 5 feet of length and built gables on the front and the rear of this building. That's the taller garage in the center. So we could put 12-foot doors on one bay to accommodate modern engines. Even with these modifications, our ladder trucks, our heavy rescue squad, and several other department vehicles will not fit in this building due to height and or length. By the end of the year, we will be down to one reserve engine that will still fit in one of the smaller bays to the right. In addition to our frontline engine, this building currently houses a reserve engine and a brush truck. All of our newer stations have 14-foot by 14-foot doors and are at least 60 feet deep. Because modern engines require the cab to be lifted for routine maintenance, the engine or the ceilings of the newer stations are at least 16 feet high. At Station 2, all the trucks have to be pulled outside to do that maintenance so we can lift the cabs. When Station 2 was built, there were typically only a two-man crew on duty there. Today, minimum staffing is 3, and if no one is on leave, sometimes 4 firefighters. There's not enough room to even consider placing an ambulance at this location. At Station 2, fitness equipment is in the basement with the laundry, the furnace, the water heaters, most of their storage for supplies and spare equipment. Bunker gear is stored in the garage, where it is continuously exposed to diesel smoke, which shortens the life of the gear and unnecessarily exposes firefighters to known carcinogens. The building does not meet current fire, building, energy, or water quality codes, and it is not ADA accessible. Lastly, the current building encroaches on setbacks from the street and also on the north property line. So any new construction would require additional variances. The goal for replacing the station is to find a location with clear sight lines for trucks entering traffic, to have room for up to 6 vehicles, storage for special team equipment, clean storage and laundry facilities for bunker gear and uniforms, clean storage for station supplies, work and living space for up to 8 persons, as well as a classroom where training can be conducted while maintaining crews in that part of the city. At Fire Station 6, which is down near on Ken Pratt, or South Pratt Parkway near Ken Pratt Boulevard, was built in 1971 as part of Project 75, which built this building. It replaced the station of 4th and Kaufman. It is a little over 6,200 square feet and currently houses an engine crew of 3 or 4 persons and an ambulance crew of 2. A reserve ambulance and 2 reserve engines are also kept there. Station 6 has many of the same issues as Station 2. Dorms, day room, offices, and fitness space are too small. Bunker gear is stored in the garage. There is inadequate storage for supplies and no space for storage of special team equipment. The building does not meet current fire, building, or energy codes, and is not ADA accessible. At this location, although the doors are 12 foot high, the ladder trucks will only fit if the ladder is stored perfectly and all accessories are removed from the top of it. In the past 12 months, we've had 2 events where this did not occur, resulting in damage to both the building and the vehicle. 2 of our hazmat trucks will not fit in the building at all. Inside the building, there is very little room to work around the vehicles. The garage ceiling is not high enough to allow the cabs to be lifted for maintenance, and the heaters, which are ceiling mounted, are uncomfortably close to the tops of the vehicles. Plans for Station 6 is to temporarily relocate the crews off-site so the current building can be raised and replaced with a building very similar to what I described for Station 2, with space for up to 6 trucks, work and living areas for up to 8 crew members, a classroom, and ample storage for station operations, and another one of the specialty teams. That is all I have. If there are any questions.
No, thank you. All right, let's move on to the Civic Center rehabilitation. We going to go in order, the stuff in our packet? Or no?
Good evening, Mayor and members of council. I'm Barbara McGrain, the Business Services Manager for Public Works and Natural Resources, and I'm going to talk to you about the Civic Center, Safety and Justice Center, Library, and continuing updates on some other older buildings. So we're in the middle of the first phase construction of structural repair at the Civic Center. As you all know, that building is approximately 45 years old. We need to continue further north and do deck drainage and additional snow melt and reslope that slab between the north end of the Civic Center and the library, because that is still part of the post-tension slab, and we need to get the planter off of it. That bottom picture is the enclosed area on the north end of the Civic Center. We want to remove that, and in that bottom picture you can see where there's a stain over by where the bike rack is, and the water just sits there, and having that water sit on that slab is not a good thing, and we need to totally reslope that. And our original cost was just to recoat that slab, but we need to reslope it, take the planters off, take that out, and then put in a snow melt system to keep that water off of the slab. And that has added, from last year, another $1.2 million to the project just to do that part of the work. The other thing we need to do on the back side, which is the top picture on the right side, is, and this is around the decking right outside of community services, and see the light colored the bottom of the brick along the wall? That's settlement, and it's about 6 inches, and you can see the cracking of the concrete, and we need to open that up and see what's underneath and take care of that. So those are some of the exterior things that we need to continue to do at the Civic Center. Moving on, another couple of areas and pictures show you some of the stairways. The stairway is on the east side of the building, closer to the south end. That stairway needs to be totally replaced and removed. And then the bottom picture shows you where we continue to have settlement and the brick coming apart, and so those are some of the items that need to continue to be done here at the Civic Center. The library and the Safety and Justice Center were built about the same time. They're each about 25 years old. We're looking at spending about $3 million at Safety and Justice and about $2 million at the library. We're looking at doing very similar things, but less amounts, because the buildings are much younger and in better condition than the Civic Center. But same sort of things. We need to do exterior waterproofing to keep the integrity of the building. We need to replace stairs and railings. A couple of bigger ticket items at both of those sites are the windows that were installed at the same time. The seals are all starting to come out of those windows, and they need to be replaced. So the library and Safety and Justice Center are going to have very similar work done to them. And there's a picture of the library with the budget. And then the last thing we want to continue on with, because we have so many buildings, is we then need to go through and keep looking once again at the rec center and the museum. They continue to age as well. We need to look at the memorial building. This specific project will allow us to do more in-depth assessments, and then has got some design dollars in it right now for a couple of buildings, as well as about $1 million each for both of those sites. And that's what I have on all of those.
All right, thank you. Golf courses. You remember how to do this, Jeff? It's been a while.
It has been. Mayor, members of council, Jeff Friesner, Recreation and Golf Manager. Here to talk about the golf course projects. Thank you. The first one is the U Creek Golf Course Maintenance Building. When the golf course was opened in 1997, there were not enough funds available to build a maintenance building. So over the last 21 years, the golf course has been using the existing farmhouse and barn and garage for a maintenance facility. The garage, I guess I'll start with the building closest, is an open structure in which we store some of our golf equipment, mowers, seeders, that sort of thing. The second building next to where the green golf cart is our maintenance building. And it is not large enough really to do any maintenance in that building. So more times than not, our mechanic is required to work on the equipment in the dirt, and which works out well if it's dry like it has been, but when it gets rainy and snowy, it makes his job a lot more difficult. But what we are proposing is to build an 8,000 square foot facility. 4,800 of that would be cold storage, where we could move all of most of our equipment indoors, and about 3,200 square feet for workspace for the staff. The next item is Twin Peaks Golf Course irrigation system. The golf course system is 40 years old. The average life of an irrigation system is 25 to 30 years. In 2010, we had to install new controllers for the system because we could no longer get equipment to work on the existing system. This project would replace all of the piping in the ground, all the sprinkler heads, and would also replace the two pump stations that provide the water to get to the course. We estimate that by doing this work that we have the potential of saving 10 to 15% in water usage, just because the system will be more efficient, and the system would have sprinkler heads that are closer together, so that we have more ability to adjust how much water goes in an area. At Twin Peaks, if you ever go there, often you'll see where sprinkler heads overlap and areas are saturated, and then you'll also see areas where they just don't get enough water. And by doing the new system, it would address all of those items. The next item is basically the same thing for Sunset Golf Course. That irrigation system is 50 years old. We are replacing some of the heads right now just because, again, we can't get parts that meet the old system that we have. But that would include replacing all of the buried pipe, the control system, and pump station. The next item is work at Centennial Pool. We're proposing that some of that the front end of the building, the locker rooms and the lobby, be redesigned to be more efficient with the amount of use that we have in that building. We'd upgrade the locker rooms, new showers, make the building ADA accessible. This I'll be back with the pool and ice study in August. There is talk in the study that talks about maybe repurposing the use of Centennial Pool if we build a competitive pool. If that would happen, we would probably remove this from the ballot question based on your direction.
That's 10. You said 11. Was there 11?
I got one more.
Ooh, I like the surprises. Yeah. Go ahead.
So the final one is back on the golf course, and this is a catch-all project. One of the things that we haven't talked about is that if the other two projects are funded through the bond project, that we would have funds available to be able to start replacing the control systems out at U Creek Golf Course. U Creek turns 21 years old this year, and we really have not done anything to start to plan to replace that system. One of the things that I'll share in regard to golf is that we consistently are able to fund the day-to-day operation. And so we don't generally have the resources to do large capital projects the way the golf fund has been operated in years past. We have a goal moving forward that if these projects would be funded through the bond project, that the goal of the golf fund would be able to increase revenues annually of $300,000 to $350,000. That would then give us the resource to do ongoing maintenance at the golf courses into the foreseeable future. One of the first things we talked that we've done that we talked about last year was implementing dynamic pricing. We had a very successful year with that last year, and had rounds, 101,000 rounds in 2017, and we've been averaging between 90 and 93,000 rounds annually. So we had a very good year, which is a starting point to increase revenue, and then we are also working on other revenue items to do sponsorships at golf holes, at tee boxes, and that sort of thing to do additional revenue for the golf courses. As well as staff openings come available within golf, we're evaluating whether we should fill those positions or not. When Larry Mills retired in October, we chose not to fill his position, and that saved a considerable amount of money for the golf fund also. So that's all I have, unless you have questions.
Doesn't look like it. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right. Anything else from staff regarding this issue?
Yes, so I'll just finish up that we're proposing a bond for $32,615,000. It would have an estimated annual debt service of $2.51 million out of the Public Improvement Fund. Hopefully that's a conservative estimate, assuming the market doesn't go too crazy between now and timing would be as if this were to pass, it would be issued in the first half of 2019. Doesn't require a tax increase because of the funding that becomes available from the previous bond that will be paid off in May. But voter approval is necessary under Tabor and under the city's charter for the issuance of bonds. So that is it. I can answer any questions you might have.
Councilmember Peck.
Thank you, Mayor Bagley. Jim, what is our debt service now on the bonds that are going to retire in 2019?
I think it's about $2.78 million. In fact, I think it's in the communications. $2.8 million.
So it wouldn't be any difference, really. We wouldn't be paying much more.
No, actually, the way we have this size, it'd be a little bit less, actually. But we've got all that money pretty much programmed in the Public Improvement Fund elsewhere, though. So.
Okay, thanks.
All right, thank you.
You bet.
All right, let's move on and appoint a Museum Advisory Board member. Is there, Dr. Waters snuck in.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor Bagley. I just, what struck me in the early part of this presentation, and Valerie and I chuckled about it, that we have a fire station that doesn't meet fire code. I mean, the irony of that cannot be lost. One observation. Second observation is, has anybody read the Tom Friedman book, That Used to Be Us? Published with, co-authored with, it'll come to me a couple of years ago. And much of their work was a kind of a summary of what's happened in this country as we have failed to make the kinds of investments we need to make, and as we've lost the ability to find the kind of will for collective action. And I look at the pictures and think about the implications of failure to maintain the infrastructure that we've created. The costs are extraordinarily more if we don't, and that what we're going to be called to do as a council and as a community is to take the kind of collective action that's going to be necessary so that we do not become the kind of communities that let the infrastructure crumble. And the third observation is this: I just cannot look at this without thinking about our conversation a few minutes ago about the potential loss of revenues up to $9.4 million, without thinking that we all need to be paying real close attention to what the implications are if that revenue goes out of our budget, and if our citizens think it's not going to affect them in some way, if we cannot, we're never going to be able to pay cash for these projects and get them done in the reasonable time frame. And we can't not do them, right, without huge implications for this community. I just think we need to pay attention to that whole picture and what the consequences are if we lose the ability to do this kind of bonding, these kinds of projects.
Right. Thank you.
So we're going to need some direction, but kind of on that, in terms of the state of infrastructure in the United States, over the last 3 weeks, I've seen an article about Domino's paving potholes in one community. I've seen another community planting trees in their potholes, and those are extreme examples. But when you talk about this maintenance aspect, whether it's buildings, streets, or whatever, we have got to be focused on that. And when you talk about capacity and everything, what you've been hearing from us is we've got to take care of what we have, especially before we look at a lot of new. And that's been a lot of the stabilization within the budgets that we've been trying to bring forward. But we need direction. Do you want us to bring this back for?
I move that we provide direction to City Council or City staff to move forward preparing a ballot initiative. Let's vote. Good enough? That was unanimous. Harold, say yes. Say yes, good enough. Say yes.
Yeah. Okay.
All right, good. We're good. All right. Now, let's vote a Museum Advisory Board member. You may.
Okay. Council. Oh. You ready? Councilmember Christensen voted for Mr. Murthy. Rodriguez voted for Mr. Murthy. Martin voted for Murthy. Waters voted for Moriarty. Ria Moriarty. These guys have hard names to pronounce. Peck voted for Moriarty. Bagley voted for Moriarty. So that's 3 and 3. And Finley voted for Ria Moriarty. So Ria will be appointed to the partial term that ends next year.
All right. Welcome to the board, Ria Moriarty. Okay, let's move on to final call, public invited to be heard. Mr. Tiger, would you please state your name and address for the record and fill us with words of wisdom?
Paul Tiger, 350 Kimbark, 1840 Delaware. Any place that isn't my house. Anyway, I'm not going to talk about untaxed food. Okay, you work on that. You saw my email. I know it was earlier in the day, and you'll get a chance to read it. But it talks a little bit about why you should do it now rather than let it drag on. In any case, I actually wanted to tell people I don't do this very often, but I love Longmont. And I was just talking to our recreation director. We bumped knuckles because we love Longmont. Okay? So I'm not trying to tear down Longmont at all. And let me talk about the trees in my park, because you know that I've been here many times to talk about the trees in my park. And it used to be the crazy chainsaw lady, and we got rid of her. So we don't have that problem. We don't have people from the city or contractors chainsawing trees. But we do have a serious problem now. And then in Rothrock-Dell Park, it's occurred now twice that, and I'm going to say that it's kids with a machete have chopped down saplings that have just been planted. And we had a tree replanted, and it was chopped down. And I'm going to try and put a camera in the park. Are you listening, kids? I'm going to put a camera in the park. And we're going to either catch you or it's going to stop happening. But people who walk through this park at usually about 7 in the morning, I ride my bike, please, I know you might be listening. Keep your eyes peeled. It's not just Rothrock-Dell. I can't imagine that that's the only place where this kind of vandalism happens. Thank you very much. We live in a beautiful town. Let's hug our trees.
Like Batman, but instead of Gotham, it's Rothrock.
It took me a while to find out why it's called Rothrock.
Yeah, well, I like Batman.
Sarah Levison, 634 Emory Street. Okay, I've got some real data for you. Before coming to the meeting, I reviewed the St. Vrain Valley School District enrollment October report from last year for the 17-18 school year. And I will give you the numbers of free and reduced lunch for 5 schools, 2 of which are not Title I schools. Burlington, 51.3% free and reduced lunch. That's 202 students. Indian Peaks, which is a Title I school, 257 students, 93.8%. Central Elementary, in a wealthy area of town, 33.9%, 118 students. Mountain View, 219. Northridge, 289. Those 5 schools add up to 1,085 students on free and reduced lunch. So if your target for the rebate program is 1,000 people, there's 1,000 students right there. And I haven't even added in the rest of the Title I schools. We have a larger problem than what you're willing to look at, number one. Number two, I have $1 here. I think it's against federal law to destroy $1, but the minute that $1 has stayed in someone's pocket, the assumption that $9.4 million will disappear in the local economy is a fallacy. Basic economic sense is that when I spend this $1, or anyone else, the first time, the city will get 3.53% of it back right away. And the business I spend it at will be paying use tax. They will pay an employee, just like Smuckers that got the tax incentive, and that employee will go out and spend the money. So the $1 that's not paid in the supermarket does not lose its value in our local economy. It's delayed gratification. The city will get it back. Last point I want to make is that we do need relief for a large amount of people. And one of the things we can do is untax food. You're trying to contain a very large problem. It's an unfair tax. It cuts across many people who are food insecure, and we don't have a number on that right now. And again, we're not going to lose $9.4 million unless people are going to flush this $1 down the toilet. If all of you are willing to flush the dollars, we'll get it back because it'll come up at the wastewater treatment plant. And so none of it would be lost. Thank you very much.
All right, seeing no one else, let's go ahead and close. Final call, public invited to be heard. Time for mayor and council comments. All right, seeing none, I just have one, I guess I got one thing. Just a quick reminder, I need to know, so as we are aware, on the 22nd of August, we will be, staff, sister cities, and city council will be traveling up to the Wind River Reservation for the Northern Arapaho tribe to get to know them. So if you're going, I know Councilmember Rodriguez is in. I know Dr. Waters wants to go, but he's unavailable. I know others are trying, but if you could let me know tomorrow, I'd like to get a head count and whatnot. I also talked to Carmen and Ray Ramirez. They're in. Harold's provided a list of 9 people from staff that are going with various expertise.
Well, you got to follow up on the specific person. But
Okay, yeah, I just need a head count for tomorrow. I told them that I'd get them a number tomorrow. All right, Councilmember Finley's in, and then of course, what? The 22nd we're going up. And then the 23rd and 24th, they will be hosting us, ranging from showing us their tribal government organizations and what they do and how they do it, their ranch, 3,800 head of cattle, as well as Mr. Fast Horse said, whitewater rafting and fishing and enjoying the outdoors and really getting a good grasp of just what their culture and their life is like, and then from there we will just talk, get to know each other. So anyway, give me that tomorrow. Anybody else? Seeing no one. Harold, the report.
No comments, Mayor, Council.
Eugene?
No comments, Mayor.
All right, great. Good meeting. We're adjourned.